Thanks very much. And it's great to kick us off here today. It's going to be a great week. So, what are we going to do in these next 50 minutes, right? We're going to try to give you a sense of the longer journey that brought us here today with the Mojaloop convening and the broader flourishing community that it is. And one of the initial steps in that was creation of the Level 1 project by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And you might say, what is this? But this is the journey that's represented on the placemat and some of the key understandings, foundations within it. And yes, you may think that this was done by my 2-year-old daughter, but it was done by the adult that is in front of you here. But to show you how things connect together, right? This is the point of the journey that we're taking you on with our arrows. And what does that really break down to be? That the Level 1 project was an idea about how do we go about creating a new payment system that meets the needs of the poor, right? This is a very important concept to think about because we have payment systems out there today. They are not meeting the needs of the poor. So how do we sort of learn from what we see out there, both the positive and the negative, and go about doing this again? And as you can see, the foundations of that are the objectives or the goals that we have, and that those are to create a payment system that serves the needs of the poor and that is also generating benefits for the economy overall that will, if you will, be self-replicating and self-generating of new opportunities. So at the core of this is how to create the payment system that starts with a secure store of value, whether that's a bank account or a wallet, right? And so I'm going to quickly, you'll see that the sort of 3 circles that go around after we get our goals on our little art piece here, that these are really what the Level 1 project consists of. It is firstly a vision of how all of this comes together. Remember, there are other payment systems out there. How does ours work? What do we need it to do? And so putting all those pieces together became a blueprint of sorts, right? How do we put it all together? You're going to see several elements of that blueprint in our meeting this morning here. And then finally, it realized that there needed to be tools to do this. And when the Level 1 project started, probably around 8 years ago, there were no tools yet. That's not the case today. And certainly, Mojaloop is one of those tools. And you'll see it, Mojaloop, pop up a little bit further in our journey on our piece of art here. So what are the foundations of this, right? That what is our blueprint based on? The cornerstone is affordability and usefulness. So if whatever we produce is not affordable, we've not done our job right. Right? We have to think through all the design choices, understand how they go through the ecosystem and how this itself is affordable to the end user. All right. But in order to get to the end user, we have to make it affordable in all aspects for the providers in the ecosystem. You're going to see a term called DFSPs. That's digital financial services providers. So that's both banks and non-banks. Okay. This is who is allowed to participate in our payment system. We're going to talk about why we feel that we, not just banks, which is what most of payment systems in the world are all about, but that's a very important aspect of what we have. And we'll show you more about that in just a second. But this payment system also has to ultimately create products that are useful, right? If this does not serve the needs of the poor, then we haven't done our job right, right? So are we, offering places that they need? Is it in all the places that they need? So, these are bigger end-to-end type design questions before we can turn back into what needs to be in the payment system itself. I'm sorry, this way. I need someone to, yeah, thank you so much. And actually, when the level 1 project started, it was, we were designing an instant payment system. We wanted it to serve the needs of the poor, but honestly, we didn't think to describe it as an inclusive instant payment system. We have Africaninda to thank for adding that important, adjective to the vocabulary that we're trying to, to the goals that we're trying to reach. And just to sort of, the visions were the same. Africaninda helped fully express it. And the terms that are underlined on here, that's emphasis added. But you can see if you ever are asking yourself, what makes a payment system inclusive? Turn back to some of these, right? So irrevocable is certainly one of them. Why is that important? Because if the transaction can be recalled, once you get it in your hands, then it's not as good as cash, right? You don't have confidence in it. We need to have an interoperable payment system. We'll see very quickly why interoperability is one of the important criteria here. And I actually just want to call these out because unfortunately we don't have that much time this morning. But we're also here all week if you want to talk about them more deeply. So again, a payment system that serves the needs of the poor is an inclusive instant payment system. So you can see how all of our different terminologies are coming together. And I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Jean, who is going to talk a little bit more about what the payment system itself looks like. Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning to you all. Very happy to be here. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you will see a typical closed loop system. For example, something like Orange Money. And in that example, Orange is a DFSP. It is holding accounts for its customers. And in order for the customers to interact, they have to be part of that ecosystem. It's not open loop. And also, contractual relationship is between the payer and DFSP. Now, there are some wonderful characteristics of that. It frequently is the first step in bringing somebody who is unbanked into the digital financial ecosystem. So that was an incredibly important step forward. But as with everything else, even though you've made progress, it can be improved. And what are the sorts of things that are lacking in this one? Well, if you're not part of that ecosystem, you cannot interoperate. If you're not part of that, and therefore there is not enough reach, it doesn't serve it's not inclusive, then because it's not inclusive, it will not necessarily have scale. And money movement is a scale business. You need scale in order to be efficient, and and only that translates into being able to lower costs for the end consumer. And then equally, if there is a walled garden, there is no competition. So there are no market forces to drive efficiencies, innovations necessarily. So we then move to the open loop system, where either individual DFSPs or DFSPs which are networks themselves are connected. And that allows you to move forward in a direction of being pro-poor, because that connectivity lowers the costs for the operators, and that in turn improves the operating economics, and that allows the savings to be passed on to the end user.
One sec, Gina, I need to ask if they could bring our slides back, so that we can move forward if we need to. Yeah, and this concept of an open loop payment system is one of the really, really most essential elements here, because otherwise there's no competition.
Exactly. And in level 1 principles, we think that payments is not where you need to compete. Payments is a foundational step. But the one point I would make about the open loop at the top of the screen is that the contractual relationship changes. That the payment system, the inclusive immediate payment system, now has contractual relationship with DFSPs. And normal practice is then to bind the relationship with the end user through DFSP. So can you advance the slides, please?
Yeah, in fact, we need to bring them back. Thank you again. And we're gonna go in, there we are.
Right. And so now that we've connected these closed loop systems and individual DFSPs, what is the competitive ecosystem and what is the collaborative space? So what the most important part for us is to support multiple entrants, right? Remember the inclusive part. And so we want to make sure that both the players who were already in the ecosystem and the new entrants are allowed to enter. And in some countries, we've had enormous improvements by people, by entities who were not originally part of the ecosystem. So if you look to India, fintechs created an enormously flourishing, enabling ecosystem to connect the previously unbanked to the DFSPs. The other component of that goes to usefulness. If you have a inclusive instant payment system, it is an enabler for creating and supporting new business cases. And that creates the environment of sustainability and also creates a virtual circuit as a circle. As you create new business cases, your scale grows, your costs go down, and it's both useful and is provided at a lower cost. And then importantly, it enables adjacencies. So one typical example that we frequently see is your provisioning of credit becomes faster since you are now able to offer it instantly. For a micro merchant, we see the velocity of transactions are faster, so they can replenish their stock multiple times a day because they have access to their money immediately. But the key thing for us to focus on here is where do we collaborate and where do we compete? And the collaborative space is twofold. First of all, you have the rules of the scheme. And the key thing about that is that you don't pick favorites. Rules need to apply equally to everyone. You don't favor the big over the small or small over the big, left over right, etc. And then rails. Again, you don't discriminate on who can connect to which rail. And then in a competitive space is where DFSP plays. How do they decide who to offer the accounts to? How do they decide what kind of services do they offer on top of IIP services provided by the scheme? Advance the slides, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing about the competitive collaborative space that tomorrow in this introductory session, I think we're going to get into more detail about understanding the economics of an inclusive instant payment system. And of course, all of that is happening in this collaborative space. These are very important concepts because we said everything needs to be able to ultimately serve the end user in a way that is both useful and affordable. So how do we create affordability? This is a fundamental, if not existential question that we always have to have in mind.
And so that really goes to the platform capabilities. And again, just very quickly, we've already seen payer and DFSP on the previous slide. We're now going to drill down into what is IIPS, the Inclusive Instant Payment System. And there are two key components, and they're distinct. There is a scheme component, which defines what it is, what services it provides, what are the rules of the road, how do you operate it, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what are the fundamental principles and governance rules. And then there is a second component, which is the operating system, which is, in fact, I would say, a physical implementation and actualization of what the scheme tells you. So if you want to think about it, scheme is a set of governance documents and governance processes. It might have things like, these are the message types that we're going to use, ISO 20022 being the typical one. These are the types of committees we're going to have. Fraud sharing might be a typical one. But then, if you have the scheme, you need something that then runs it, because you can't plug into the scheme, you plug into the operating platform. And what are the components of the operating platform? The three key components that level 1 says you must have in order for it to be level 1 compliant is the switch itself, right? Remember, you have one network and you have another network and they don't talk to each other without the switch connecting them under the rules of the scheme. Now, once you connect the networks and the individual DFSPs, we want to make them useful. And one of the things that makes them incredibly useful is ability to use, to address the payer by what you know. So it is much better to be able to say, when you're dealing with a micro merchant, my flower shop, than to have to use, this is their bank and this is their account at their bank. And so what we've seen in many countries is those who have started without the directory, their systems experienced slower growth. And then years later, when they added the directory, there was a pronounced kink in the growth curve, and it went up and to the right. And Elizabeth will talk about that in a minute. But having learned that, we now recommend, don't wait 5 years, do it right away. The second step is, the third key component is anti-fraud provisioning. And the reason why we feel that it has to be there up front is primarily because, particularly for the less economically advantaged populations, a fraud event is devastating. Some of the stats say things like 23% of the population in some countries stop using digital services after a fraud event. And then there is an enormous emotional toll on people when they are a victim of a fraud event. And as you know, fraudsters are notorious for exploring weak links. And so when a new system deploys, this is the first thing they will try. Therefore, it is critical that the systems be hardened and be fraud resistant from day zero. And one thing I will mention here specifically is, even though we call out fraud management specifically under the platform, fraud is one of those things that is everyone's responsibility. So scheme has a role in both providing the tools at the scheme level on handling fraud, because scheme sees all of the transactions going through, but then it also is responsible for guiding DFSPs in provisioning of their fraud services, because DFSPs are the ones who have an enormous amount of context information when they are on the initiating side. They know which mobile device it came from. They know where that mobile device is. They have done KYC, so they know your customer. So they know a lot about the customer. And similarly, on the receiving side, even though they don't know a lot about the sender, they know a lot about the receiver. And they can see things like, is there unusual volume spikes happening? Is there unusual activity? Does it look like structuring is occurring? So, and then there is also payee education about what is fraud and what is not fraud. So those are the key things that the platform and the scheme do.
And I'll just chime in to, of course, note that that is another tool that is available from what is the level 1 project, fraud management software. And that is, of course, Tazama, for anyone who's not yet aware.
Okay. And of course, the switch manages the clearing, which is the movement of funds between payer and payee DFSPs, and clearing creates settlement positions. So in a simple example, if I transfer 10 units of value from one to the other, DFSP 1 has to go down 10 and DFSP 2 has to go up 10. And the process of making that happen is called settlement. And very frequently, settlement happens on the books of the central bank, which is where DFSPs have their bank accounts. So central bank is a bank of banks. And so the scheme, IIPS, has to interact with the central bank. And there are a couple of ways that happen. Settlement can happen in a real-time gross situation, or it can happen in a deferred net settlement type thing, and both work. And we can talk about that more in detail, but let's move now to the next slide.
Yeah, and of course, we're talking a lot about categorical terms here. If I could ask, thank you. I just want to make a point on this one very quickly, that we see our open loop payment system on the top half. And it's important to remember that, the instant payment system is its own payment system. It will coexist along others. And the DFSPs that we are working with may be members of these others. And of course, that's an important understanding, because, everyone has limited time and resources, so that we need to make our system attractive for the others to also join. And we've been talking about categorical choices here. And I sort of inserted this data slide in the middle of that to remind us of the impactfulness of the choices that we are going to make. You can see these are several instant payment systems around the world and how they have performed since they have started. What we're measuring here is a very important determinant or indicator for us. It's transactions per capita. Of course, that's a reflection of overall volume, but this is transactions per capita. And you can see, you can read the legend at the bottom. We have Australia, Mexico, UK, Brazil, Singapore, India, Sweden, and not one, but 2 instant payment systems from the US. And the one at the top, or the purple, that's Brazil, where their phenomenally successful instant payment system has basically served it's the hallmarks of usefulness and affordability. So it's clearly useful because it is doing very well among all use cases. They put in all use cases from the beginning. and it is affordable. And it's affordable because the scheme has pricing to the consumer as a requirement that consumers are allowed to transact 30 transactions per month for free. That is something, a rule that the scheme applies to all the DFSPs. So, I mean, they wouldn't use it if it didn't work. No one's forcing them to use it, but they find it both affordable and useful. Businesses do pay, but you know, a more detailed story. And to Jean's point, you know, other scheme choices actually really can be very expressive in your results. If you look at India and UPI, you see in the first 5 years, it really didn't do so well. But then they added the directory for addressing by a mobile number as opposed to bank account number. And, you know, then the curve starts to shift very quickly. So you can see all of these choices really do matter. Very quickly, let's you know, take us back up a level. So what does this mean in practice? An inclusive instant payment system. Again, credit push transfers, no debits. That's an important aspect of keeping costs out of the system. And the credit push are irrevocable. Once confirmed, they're put into the system and they cannot be recalled in the way that mini debits can. Again, another very important cost as well as confidence variable. These are from account to account, wallet to bank account, etc. So one store of values to the other. And there's instant availability to the end receiver. This is very important because, you know, when Jean sends me money via ACH in the United States, I have to wait 2 days for it to show up in my account. You know, how useful is that? It's a vivid illustration. Actually, you should try that, Jean. Send me some funds via ACH. It needs to be low cost, right? There's the PIX curve that we saw, the UPI curve that we saw. UPI is also free to consumers. So, you know, we're seeing that very vividly here. It needs to be available all the time, whenever we need it, and it has to be there. And by mobile ready, I think we're also just making a reference here that, you know, this needs to be very simple in the end user UX. Of course, we're not providing the end user app, but we need to make it possible for the DFSPs to provide, make it very simple to use and addressable by mobile number at a minimum. These are more design principles that just wanted to recap. And it's hard for me to see the slide here, so I'm turning around here. I want to make sure that we haven't touched on any of these. Account type is a very important one because we haven't touched on this yet. And we're really, in order to keep costs low, we're looking at good funds, right? So what do we mean by that? There needs to be money in the account, whether it is my personal account that I'm sending from, or whether it is my DFSP's settlement account at the settlement bank. Funds need to be in that account before the transaction can move to the next phase. And, you know, some systems do offer credit to DFSPs. And you know, of course, that can work out fine until one day when it doesn't, right? If the edge cases also matter. And the reason that level 1 feels strongly about good funds is that when something does go wrong, everyone, of course, in the end pays, all the end users. And the end users that our payment system is designed for, you know, that's not in their budget, right? To pay for some systemic failure that everyone in the ecosystem needs to absorb. So that's why good funds is important to minimize overall system costs. Scale is a term that I want to hit on here as well, because, you know, we can't have scale and grow our volumes without multiple use cases. So we want to get to all use cases very, very quickly. And this is a choice, right? A lot of people say, I'm going to start with P2P, and then I'll add something next year. I'll add another use case the following year. Of course, that's a very practical approach to this. I'd like to encourage everyone to add as many use cases as feasible early on, because your end users in the system will find a way to use them. Right? If they're relevant to them and useful, they will use them, and your volumes will grow. Because there's only so many person-to-person transactions that everyone in the system will make. Businesses do not accept person-to-person transactions if it's a true commerce payment, right? It's payment, it's just an exchange of value, not a commerce payment at that point. So scale is very important. We're going to hit that back at the end.
Elizabeth, if I can just add one thing to it, one of the key participants in this ecosystem is governments. And so one of the key use cases we would advise people to look at immediately is P2G, B2G, and reverse of that. So we have very frequently seen that governments are a key enabler to seeding the initial scale in the ecosystem, both from a payment perspective and from the directory perspective, which drives usefulness. So, for example, in Thailand, if you want to receive your pension payments from the government, you have to put your information in a directory. And then we've seen Thailand to be one of the cases where the directory usage was one of the fastest, specifically because of that. And that, again, speaks to the inclusiveness principle that we want all potential stakeholders in the ecosystem to join as well. So back to you.
I'm so glad you brought up government payments, because that is actually, in my opinion, one of typically the most difficult use case. Why is it difficult? Well, it's difficult because just like with, you know, person-to-business transactions, you have to have connections to the businesses that the FSPs need to go out and acquire the business to accept this. But with, you know, government-to-person, person-to-government payments, we also need to carry additional information. So that additional information may be your national ID. It could be your land plot number, your driver's license number, something that uniquely connects your identity to whatever it is you're going to pay. So, you know, we have to be able to get that information into the transaction itself. And it also has to be consumed by the government on the other end. And that's often a challenging point, because government systems where they exist are often quite antiquated. And so they may need to be upgraded. And also, you know, not every ministry, if you will, in the government is fully digitized. So sometimes it's the curve to get to a software that reads all of their information. And these can take years. And I do mean years to make this happen. It's a big effort itself. And if your payment system wants to be successful and being fully useful, this is something we really need to plan for. I know it's not a problem in every country, but where it may be a problem, it's something to start thinking about very early. Because why is this government use case so very important to us? It's because those are a lot of basically command volumes, right? Every time you renew your driver's license, everybody that drives has to do that. We all have to pay taxes. And of course, on the other side, governments are probably the largest employer. So they have payroll and they also pay benefits to many people, whether it's a pension or some sort of social assistance. And those transactions are regular and are very important to growing the volumes in the system, which keeps our costs low and allows us to achieve scale.
If I can take maybe 30 more seconds, even though we're coming towards the end, I want to focus on Common Core and additional protocols. So it is true that inclusive instant payment system will enable all of the use cases. But what needs to happen in order for it to actually come to fruition is DFSPs need to know how to use these use cases, and there needs to be initial work done ahead of time to make sure that the end users are there to take up the use cases. So it's not enough to just provide a technical solution and say, yes, it's able to do a specific use case. It is very important ahead of time to include in the program the specific use cases you're going to do, involve all the stakeholders up front. And as we said, the contractually bound ones are DFSPs. But what that does mean is that the ones who are not contractually bound still need to be brought into the conversation. Governments, regulators, everybody needs to be brought into the conversation so that when the system is ready to be used, everybody knows how they're going to use it. And the other point I would want to make is that when you provide an inclusive instant payment system, there is a design decision to be made, whether it's thin, which is just provide bare minimum of services, or thick, which is providing a significant stack of services. And the trend these days is toward thicker systems because it allows for shared services. And the beauty of shared services is you build it once and you use it many times by multiple stakeholders, which again drives towards the key principle of making it affordable.
Absolutely. That concept of stakeholder engagement is a very important one because it needs to happen early so that they're engaged and bought into the system design, that we all understand how it is designed to work, what are our goals, right? And then it continues, not only in the adding new use cases, but it needs to be continuous, particularly if they are members of our payment system. Because if they are members of our payment system, they need to have a voice in the future direction of the payment system. So now I'm going to bring us back to just a couple of different points, right? So when the idea of level one was first, thought of and given this name, there was no Mojaloop. But the notion that we needed to develop tools was, now we know one of those tools that is in implementer's toolkit, if you will, that they have access to is Mojaloop, right? So Mojaloop is an ability to create this payment system that we have described, an inclusive instant payment system. It, provides the code, it has continual enhancements within it, and it is done here in this very rich community of people bringing their ideas to solve the challenges that we all have. As you know, it's not something you buy off the shelf, right? So you make this choice, you put it into your payment system, and it can bring substantial benefits. And, one of those substantial benefits is the opportunity to really be the true owner of your own payment system, right? so that you're not subject to some whatever, some faraway countries' decision or companies rather, decisions about what goes into the platform. You can control its direction. And more importantly, perhaps, is that it will, using Mojaloop will bring lower costs. There is a calculator on the Mojaloop Foundation site that helps you, if you're at the beginning of this journey, to understand what are some of the magnitudes of these savings. So I encourage you to go check that out. And it can bring you a faster return on investment. How does it do that? Because the cost is lower from the beginning. And when you truly get into these numbers, even if the cost of the platform is low, the overall cost of a payment implementation is still quite significant. So keeping the cost of the platform at a manageable level is a very important foundation to start from. And if the platform itself can be low cost, then those savings should be extended to the DFSPs who we hope will extend them to the end users, right? So that's how we get to affordability as for the end consumer here. So that's why we have this very simple mixing or simple map on your placemat to show you how all of these blocks fit together. And just last point here, why is all of this important? Because if I could give you one word as a key to success, it's scale of your payment system. If you don't have scale, you're going to be that flat line on the bottom of your, on the chart that we just saw a minute ago. And in order to make it affordable, what does that mean? It's a question we get a lot. And affordability, we're using the hallmark that the fee to the DFSPs, right? That's your customer as the payment system. The fee to the DFSPs should be around 1 US cent or less. And some of you are saying, this woman is a little crazy. Yeah, this is in many areas aspirational, but in other areas, we know it is a reality because they have achieved scale. Where is it a reality? Well, one of the earlier inspirations was the United States ACH system. It runs for a fraction of a US penny. Now we know in India, the transactions, or at least to the end users, offered for free. We actually don't know the pricing to the DFSP, but it has to be something very close, right? If they, to a penny, if they're offering it to the end users for free. But with PIX, an example that's been around for 4 years now, their charge to the to the DFSP, excuse me, is 0.002 US cents for every 10 transactions. And of course, Brazil has a large population, right? That is an important consideration there. But no one's making those end users use PIX transactions. So clearly it's meeting a lot of needs, and they're continually being able to add that scale. And just this month, we have one new member of this group that is offering transactions to the DFSPs at below 1 US cent, and that's the new payment system which is being launched by the Central Bank of Colombia. The government just released that pricing about 2 weeks ago. So finally, if we want scale, how do we get there? Back to our very beginning, we have to create the ability to pay anyone and be paid by anyone. So I hope this helps bring the concept of the Level 1 project and its philosophical objectives and Mojaloop together. Tomorrow, we're going to dig even deeper into what that means at the platform and cost level. So I hope you'll join us early for part 2. And I know we don't really have time for questions, but we're around. Please stop by, ask any questions that you have. Thanks so much for getting early up and joining us.